Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran and this is episode 43, part 8 of my series on the Hoysalas. Here's a little recap of what happened till now. In the last episode, Vishnuvardhana successfully captured Talakadu and brought an end to the already disinterested and largely absent Chora rule in Gangavadi. Vishnuvardhana's decisive victories in Talakadu were not the result of random acts of brute force and battle axe, but the result of a strategy played out after long-range planning and village-level integration, these things commonly understood to be modern military practices. What happened to Vishnuvardhana that after a decade of reticence and quiet had turned him into a war machine? This psychological makeover has been noted rather than debated, but personally, it seems to me that Vishnuvardhana had been in a slump ever since he and his older brother Balala I had been foiled in their attempt to throw off the yoke of overlordship of the Western Chalukyas. And it seemed that this new spiritual journey with Vaishnava Ramanuja, the only significant thing that had changed in his life, shook him free of whatever depression he was in and set him loose. And the beast, some might argue the best in him, had been unleashed. All this was in earlier episodes, the ones leading up to this one, and in this episode, join me as I take a look at the 2 years after Talakadu, the crazy 2 years of expansion of the Hoysala Empire. But first, as always, I must pause to thank the Prestige Group for making this podcast possible through their corporate support. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Military activity in the years leading up to Talakadu, let's say that's between 1108 and 1116, were mainly small skirmishes as Vishnuvardhana's forces mopped up a number of small principalities, but they kept clear of Gangavadi. We may recognize some of these today. Nangali, which is in the Mulbagal Taluk of Kolar district. In this, he may have been assisted by the remnant families of the Gangas and the Nolambas, the erstwhile kingdoms that ruled parts of the Bengaluru region. And then he proceeded further south into the Annamalai hills and the edges of the Chera kingdoms bordering Kerala. Now, they were smaller skirmishes, and it is unclear how vested in them Vishnuvardhana was personally. In all, these appear to be more of a consolidation of the empire than an active military expansion. But Talakadu was definitely the turning point. The conquests of Talakadu and Kolar were grist to Vishnuvardhana's mill. The troops were elated and motivated, and their enthusiasm seemed to have spilled over to the poets, and a highly inspired inscription followed that spoke of the earth trembling with the stamp of Vishnuvardhana's horse. Similes fought with adjectives in the rest of his inscription, as the poet described Vishnuvardhana's military campaigns, not letting chronology and logic interfere with verse. That inscription, however, ended with the words, having made Kanchi tremble, champion over the hill chiefs and an intoxicated royal swan sporting in the woods on the banks of the Kaveri. While that swan metaphor likened Vishnuvardhana to a majestic swan symbolizing grace, superiority, and self-assuredness, and intoxicated implying his elation or supreme confidence following these victories, the phrase, having made Kanchi tremble, sent historians scurrying for more fact. The question this raised was whether Vishnuvardhana had taken Kanchi or not. If he had invaded and occupied Kanchi, it would have been a big deal, because it would have meant that Kulothunga Chola's reign was finished, and that was not an event to be dealt with lightly. Early historian and epigraphist Jonathan Fleet called all these descriptions as hyperbole, also because the title Taker of Kanchi appeared very often in epigraphical references to Vishnuvardhana, and Fleet thought that it referred to no more than that Talakadu victory, and it was an exaggeration of that local truth. And all this, despite another inscription that got into a little more detail, and in that, Vishnuvardhana squeezed Madurai in the hollow of his palm, and together with his general, torched Jananathapura, wherever that is, and with one look, rid the world of poverty. But while poetic license is all very well on Prashastis, Vishnuvardhana did appear to make an effort to march on Kanchi for the bigger prize. Now let's look at that march on Kanchi. Assuming that he was now operating out of Talakadu, Vishnuvardhana appears to have first marched about 180 kilometers northeast towards Kuvalallapura, or Kolar as we know it, and captured it from the local representatives of the Cholas. And from there, he took Nangali, the one I described earlier. That town exists today. Its strategic importance back then was that it was a frontier town between the Mysore regions and North Arcot, and this would have marked the outer edges of the growing Hoysala territory, which now included almost the entire south and southwest Deccan. And then Vishnu marched about 25 kilometers northeast into modern Andhra and took Kottayur, which is the present-day Ladigam, in the Chittoor district. And in this brief stretch between Nangali and Ladigam, it is likely that he was challenged by the Lada family, who were a small but independent kingdom. Well, not any longer. Vishnuvardhana's list of conquests during this period is long and impressive. It included areas around Talakadu stretching southwards to Salem. One major set of battles took place in a region called Chengeri, likely in the Salem district. Around the same time, Vishnuvardhana is said, or his forces are said, to have also captured a place called Benagiri, or at least that's what the inscription seems to suggest. Now, what were these two places? The confusion comes from the Kannada script of the Hoysala era, where the letters Ba and Cha looked very similar. But evidence hints that these were indeed two separate locations. In fact, an inscription praises Vishnuvardhana as Vainya, comparing him to a powerful force that shook the mountain-like lord of Chengeri. It also calls his sword a royal kite that destroyed the serpent of Benagiri. Now, the poetic nature of these descriptions and the effort to name both places suggests that they might well have been two separate victories. Now, at Benagiri, the local ruler Narasimhavarma abandoned his queens, fled his kingdom, and ultimately went to his end. Now, records say that Vishnuvardhana took charge of these royal women who were left behind. That wasn't unusual for the time. Women, especially those from royal families, were often seen as symbols of a king's prestige and honor. Capturing them was not just about plunder, it was a statement of dominance over the defeated ruler's legacy. Meanwhile, Chennagiri's ruler apparently commanded such a huge army that it kicked up a dust that covered the skies. But after the fall of Talakadu, Vishnuvardhana sent a young commander to secure the region, and I will speak more of this young commander a little later in this episode. Within a week, this commander defeated the Chennagiri ruler, burned the city, plundered its lands. It was another swift and decisive Hoysala victory. But about this commander, he was barely in his teens. Well, as I said, more of that is coming up. If we look at descriptions of the other conquests of the time, it is likely that Benagiri was located somewhere in the Western Ghats. Now, of all the victories, each victory marked one more step in Vishnuvardhana's campaign to expand the Hoysala power, leaving a trail of defeated rulers, acquired kingdoms, consolidated empire, and captured territories in his march into Talakadu. I would like to digress a little bit now to talk about all this taking of women. During the medieval times, women were often seen as part of the spoils of war alongside gold, cattle, and horses. As I said before, the way they saw it, the capture of women wasn't merely an act of plunder and pillage. It had a deep symbolic weight which demonstrated the conqueror's dominance not just in the battlefield, but also all over the vanquished ruler's legacy and lineage. These women were sometimes absorbed into the victor's court, married off strategically, or they were retained as trophies of conquests, their fate dictated by the whims of these new rulers. This practice proves the patriarchal nature of warfare, where women become both the literal and figurative currency of power and humiliation in the larger game of politics and territorial expansion. Now, this commodification of women, quite literally commodification, as they were treated as commodities, finds proud mention on several inscriptions across several kingdoms right across the medieval era. Anyway, back to Chennagiri. The ruler Perumal, a typical Tamil title, was likely a small chieftain in the southern Ghats. Now, he had once defied the Choras, and Vishnuvardhana had encouraged this rebellion. Nonetheless, small or large, proud of his victory, Vishnuvardhana took on the title, Fire of Death to the Force that belonged to Chengiri. Now, there's no better way of summarizing Vishnuvardhana's conquest up to this point than by a poet who had some fun at everyone's expense. On an inscription from 1125, he is summed up like this. Adiyama ran as if in a race, and learning the pace, Narsammavarman ran. Chenagiri multiplied upon that pace, and the Pandyas also ran. Who did not run before King Vishnu, the ornament of the Yadavas? Now, we are not done with Vishnuvardhana's almost insane pace of conquest. I will be back in 30 seconds to tell you more, right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hi, I'm back. All the epigraphical descriptions appear to point to the fact that Vishnuvardhana did march as far as Kanchi, which was then the royal center of the Choras. But what happened there remains a gap that needs to be filled, or maybe it'll never get filled. Because there's a great level of detail we have on even the smallest of his campaigns, but we are reduced to making vague inferences on whether or not he really invaded Kanchi, or maybe he stopped short and returned, or maybe he was repelled from the capital. Or here's another thought. Having traveled all the way to Kanchi, did he meet Kulothunga Chola and work something out? Now, we might not want to discount this entirely. It must be remembered that Vishnuvardhana's bigger and more immediate problem was his desire to break free from the Western Chalukyas and assert his sovereignty. An alliance with the Choras could have been on the table, notwithstanding the recent battles at Talakadu. Well, whatever it is, the inference that seems most logical is that he did not capture or even invade Kanchi. Again, given the volume of poetry and prashastis about small neighborhood campaigns of his, the taking of Kanchi would have sent the poets into raptures and not have them relegated to a mere mention that he beat some drums in Kanchi. The historian Krishnaswamy Iyengar provides us with a mashup of different inscriptions that together sum up Vishnuvardhana's conquest to this point. And I quote from this very interesting exercise. First, taking into his arms the fortunes of the Hoysala kingdom which he had inherited, he brought all directions under his command. Capturing Talakadu, he became the first ruler of the Ganga kingdom. He made the earth tremble with the tramp of his Kamboja horses. He was the lord of the Gandhagiri, split the great rock of Pandya, shattered the heads of the Tulu kings, and destroyed the army of Jagadeva, and devoured the fierce elephant Someshwara. He displayed his valor before Manikya Devi of the Chakrahuta throne, brought down the pride of Adiyama, overthrew the tree Narsammavarman, split the skull of King Kala, destroyed the serpent Chengi, and broke down the plantain stems, the spears of the Irungojas. He shook the mountain, Chengiri, Perumala, set up Patti Perumala, made Talakadu his own, conquered the Kongu country, protected Nolambavadi, expanded Neela Parvata, extended Kuvalalappura, uprooted Kovattur, shook Theriyur, crossed over the Vallur, unchained Nangapura, pulled up the door of the Ghats and made Kanchipura tremble. The references in this passage include the campaign where Vishnuvardhana had marched south into Rameshwaram, defeating the Pandyas, and hence the reference to that splitting of the great rock of Pandya, and from another inscription, how he had crushed Madurai in the hollow of his palm. But descriptions of these campaigns in the east and the south appear to be more, as I said, hyperbolic than they are fact. There's no evidence of any permanence that suggests the successful invasions of those parts, so it is hard to find out what really happened. But by 1880, Vishnuvardhana was back in residence at Talakadu, and this, more than anything else, signified that he had now taken over Gangavadi completely. But the story of his conquest is far from done. The following years marked a fresh spate of conquests. His top generals at the time were Mariane, who you might remember was the father of the 3 girls whom Ballala I had married in the same ceremony, and the highest-ranking official of his kingdom, Gangaraja, the one who had captured Talakadu. And one inscription takes pains to mention that the relationship between the 2 generals was harmonious and totally free of strife. Following the first spate of battles, there was a new star in the Hoysala sky, and this was the young Bittiyanna. He was the son of the general Mariane. Now, from a young age, Bittiyanna displayed extraordinary talent and intelligence, and in fact was considered to be something of a genius, earning him the special favor of Vishnuvardhana, who treated him almost like a foster son. According to an inscription from 1136, Vishnuvardhana played a significant role in shaping Bittiyanna's early life. Now the king performed Bittiyanna's Upanyaya ceremony with great celebration and pomp, and by the age of 7 or 8, after ensuring that he had mastered the art of warfare, he arranged Bittiyanna's marriage. The bride was the daughter of his chief minister and was described as a girl of exceptional qualities and noble lineage. In a grand ceremony, Vishnuvardhana personally poured water from a golden kalasa or goblet onto Bittiyanna's hand, symbolizing the marriage, which was celebrated as a moment of great happiness and fortune in the kingdom. By the age of 10 or 11, Bittiyanna's intellect was said to be as sharp as kusa grass. Now that was a grass that was used commonly in the rituals of Brahmins every day. Recognizing this brilliance on the part of the young boy, the king conferred upon him the title Mahaprachanda Dandanatha, and with this title came complete authority and the role of Sarvadhikara or chief administrator, making him a leader of the people. His rise as the Immadi Dandanayaka, or second commander, reflected Vishnuvardhana's personal interest of the boy. But let's remember, he was still a boy. He was barely into his teens. And as a precocious teen, he had been tasked by the king with leading a campaign to recover tributes from the Kongu areas, and part of this was that campaign to the Chenagiri hills. The result of this campaign received loud praise, especially on an inscription in Belur, which spoke of the boy's military successes and the fact that he had brought back a horde of elephants and many other spoils of war. Now here's an extract that is specific to Bittiyanna, and the reason I spent all this time on this event is because the boy in question was so young. Now the king's thoughts were expressed with an unusual level of fondness, even more unusual because he was sending that young boy to war. But the thoughts were described like this. Among the titled Marias, who is there like you in the world? Bring quickly the tributes from Kongu. And on the king thus ordering, within a fortnight, he had put Chenagiri to flight, burnt his city, plundered his territory, and returned with an astonishing amount of tribute, accompanied by a troop of lusty elephants. And Vishnuvardhana declared, "This boy will take Kongu, will he not? He will bring in the troop of elephants, will he not?" And the king's golden smile lighting up his words. The inscription said that the young lad had pleased his king to horripilation with all the wealth and elephants that he had captured. Now horripilation is goose flesh. The king got goose flesh looking at all the loot. By this time, in Vishnuvardhana's frenetic pace of conquest, he had secured himself substantively. He had conquered territories across the southern Deccan all the way up to some northern parts of the land. Even if one discounted all the descriptions of all the campaigns in Kanchi, Madurai, Rameshwaram and the northern territories as being something of exaggerations, the rest of what he did take over ought to have given Vishnuvardhana pause to consolidate his acquisitions and take stock. But even then he would have been restless. His first goal had been achieved, the taking of Talakadu. But he was yet to achieve his second goal, and that was complete independence from the Chora overlords. Now there is enough evidence to suggest that everything was not going swimmingly with the relationship between Vikramaditya VI and with Vishnuvardhana. Now, in the heat of campaign after campaign, Vishnuvardhana had acquired title after title, so many that these long and endless titles must have been the bane of breathless people obliged to announce the king. Now, the one person who would not have been impressed and would have been justifiably uncomfortable with all of these titles was Chalukya king Vikramaditya VI. Now, Vishnuvardhana, flaunting all these titles, could only signal one thing to the world, is that he was looking for the one title that he coveted the most and the one title that he could not still legitimately use. And that title was Maharajadiraja, or Emperor. Now, would Vishnuvardhana ever get to realize his ambition to break free of the Western Chalukyas, achieve independence, and become an emperor? Well, the story continues into the next episode, which is coming up very, very soon. Stay tuned for that. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.